Hello. So can everybody hear me okay? Yeah? You know, that's fantastic, because that means that you guys can hear what I'm saying without having to put a lot of conscious effort into the words that I'm using. Now let's talk about a different situation here, and let's talk about a deaf child who has hearing parents that pay about $100,000 to have a surgeon drill into the 12-month-old skull down to the cochlea, where they're going to puncture the cochlea with a coil. And when they're done with that part, they're going to, next to that hole, drill an indent about the size of a quarter, and they're going to place underneath the skin a magnet. Once this surgery is complete, this child has what is known as the cochlear implant. And it is hailed by doctors as a device that is supposed to give deaf people access to the hearing world. But I'd like to show you guys just exactly what world they are given access to. I'm not going to show you, that is not a glitch on my PowerPoint. Now, if you guys or anything have the same beliefs as my class did, you might have thought that the cochlear implant would allow you to hear well. But another thought that you guys might have thought is that a majority of deaf children are born to deaf parents. And the reality is it's the opposite. According to Moore and Levington, who wrote the book For Hearing People Only, it's actually 90% of deaf children are born to hearing parents. So what I hope you guys will be able to take away from in my speech is that if you ever have a deaf child, you should teach them American Sign Language. What we'll be covering today is the issues with the cochlear implant, how to learn American Sign Language, and also what the benefits are if you choose to teach, should you ever have a deaf child, American Sign Language. But first, I'd like to talk about the issues with the cochlear implant. Now, a lot of people think that with the cochlear implant, it's going to give a deaf child a better education. It's going to help them learn more, when in reality, it actually takes away from their education. According to a woman named Irene Lay, who is a deaf woman from the Through Deaf Eyes documentary, she actually says a lot of people believe that the cochlear implant is an automatic way into the spoken language, when in reality, we all have thousands of hair cells that pick up and transmit signals to the brain that the cochlear implant just cannot replicate. This means that a deaf child is going to have to work 10 times harder to understand what that sound means. I went and I did research into this, and I found, depending on the individual, it takes hours away from their education. It takes around 7 to 14 hours a week, depending on the person, and a lot of deaf people, when they get older, they get spiteful, thinking back to these training sessions, because they're like, I could have been learning math. I could have been focusing more on English. Instead, I'm having to learn what this cochlear implant is giving me. They have to go through training sessions like oral, learning how to speak, and oral, learning how to hear. But now that I've talked about that, I would like to also mention another belief that people believe, is that the cochlear implant is going to eliminate the need for lip reading. Now, the thing is you're still going to need to lip read with the cochlear implant, and the issue with that is that a lot of times what we don't know is that only 30% of conversation is visible on the lips. It means if you have someone that doesn't have the cochlear implant that's trying to read your lips, 70% of your conversation with that person is them just guessing the context of your conversation and just making assumptions on what you're saying than really communicating with you. But also, another belief that people have is that, well, at least if my child had the cochlear implant, they're not going to need an interpreter that's standing up in the classroom and signing everything the teacher's saying, and it's not going to make them feel different from their peers. The reality is that the cochlear implant, you're not only going to need an aid in the classroom, but you're going to need two aids. You're going to need an electronic note taker and a summary note taker. And that's because the cochlear implant only gives you about 50% of a conversation, at best, if you're good with it. And that also, to get 50% of a conversation, their brain is working overtime to understand what the cochlear implant is giving them. So they're going to need the electronic note taker and they're going to need the summary note taker, because there's no way that they're going to be able to sit there and try to lip read what the teacher's saying and understand what the cochlear implant's giving them while looking up and down and jotting down notes. It'd be way too much of a hassle for them. But a big one is that, well, I want my child to enjoy music. Who doesn't want that for their child? But in reality, this is actually what they hear with the cochlear implant in music. Now this is actually what that sample is supposed to sound like. Okay, so you might think, well, yeah, that sounds pretty horrible. But how come, Cailey, I have seen so many YouTube videos of deaf children having their cochlear implant turned on for the first time, and they're crying and they're excited and they're so happy. Who would get excited over that kind of sound? Well, if you put it in perspective, if you're a deaf person that was born deaf and you've never heard music before, and you're being told this cochlear implant is going to allow you to hear what we hear, and then suddenly it turns on, you go, oh my gosh, this is what you guys hear, this must be it, and they don't know that they're actually being cheated. So, but now that I've talked about the issues with the cochlear implant, I'd now like to talk about what my solution is for this issue, is teaching, if you ever have a deaf child, American Sign Language. There are many things that you can do to have access to this language. One of them is taking a class here at North Idaho College by Jacqueline Rossi or by Dennis Matthews. And I promise you, I've taken the 101 class and the 102 class, and out of all the students we have, there was not one that was walking out of that classroom only knowing hello and goodbye. You will be able to utilize this language, I can assure you. But also, okay, if you have a deaf child, you're going to be taking them to a lot of doctor appointments, making sure they don't have any infections in the ears. You might be low on a budget. So one of the options that you have is to learn it online. This man's name is Bill Vickers, and he's a deaf man that actually records his American Sign Language class and puts it on YouTube for people to enjoy. And so that's one way that you can learn it. But another way is, before this speech, I went to the Coeur d'Alene Library and I found entire shelves filled with books about how to learn American Sign Language. So you guys are not going to have a lack of having access to this language. Also, I will have a petition outside that goes against giving children as young as 12 months old the cochlear implant. But now that I've talked about the issues with the cochlear implant and my solution of American Sign Language, I'd now like to talk about what would happen if, should you ever have a deaf child, teach them American Sign Language. This woman here is named Sheena. She was found out to be deaf when she was a little girl, and her parents started teaching her American Sign Language. You couldn't tell this woman, just because she communicates differently from us, that her life is not fulfilling and successful. She is an author, she's a vlogger, and she's a wife, and she's a proud mother of 2 young girls. She has a very fulfilling and exciting life. But also, according to Jacqueline Rossi, an American Sign Language interpreter, in the last 20 years, deaf people have gone on to become doctors, to become lawyers, and especially in the last 10 years, gone into the computer science degree. But today, after everything I've said, I really hope it resonates in you guys when I say, if you have a deaf child, please teach them American Sign Language. You're going to give them a better life for it. What I've covered today is the issues with the cochlear implant, ways that you can learn American Sign Language, and also what the benefits are if you ever have a deaf child, if you teach them American Sign Language. But now that my speech is coming close to signing off, I have a petition that's going to be near the signing booth outside for you guys to sign in. It's against giving children as young as 12 months old the cochlear implant. I hope if I've convinced you guys today that the cochlear implant is not a solution for our future deaf children, that you'll sign it and help out these kids and give them a world filled with communication, not man-made sound. If I haven't convinced any of you guys that the cochlear implant is an issue for our future deaf children, then please, by all means, after the speech contest, don't be afraid to come up and ask me any questions you feel I have not answered. I will, to the best of my abilities with the information that I have, be as much as possible try to answer it. Thank you guys.